Welcome to Season 3 of Maintaining Mental Fitness, a free webinar series to support mental fitness for organizations and individuals in an endemic world. A big thank you to our sponsors, the Continuing Care Safety Association and Biz Safety Software.
Welcome everybody. Our guest today is Dave Upper. He's the fire chief for the city of St. Catharines. And I won't go too much into story because I'll let him tell his own, but maybe we can get started there, Dave, and just give us in a few minutes or so, like, what was your story in terms of how you've got to where you've got to as fire chief of the city of St. Catharines?
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked that question if that was something I thought about when I started this journey 31 years ago. Was this the game plan on the onset? And I said, no, I was so excited to ride the trucks and kick indoors that it never, ever was a thought in my mind. But as you kind of go through the seasons of change, right? You move through the ranks and you become a captain, and then the opportunity comes to, again, move up and become an assistant platoon chief and then a platoon chief. And this is where the whole mental health journey started really for me as a platoon chief, because I was overseeing a team of 36 and starting to work alongside, and you have these incredible men and women under your care, so to speak, and you're looking after them. And then my time with the platoon chief was about 5 years between the assistant platoon chief and platoon chief's position. And then that's when I was asked to move into the office as the deputy fire chief, overseeing the entire operations piece with St. Catharines Fire. There's 134 men and women riding the trucks, so my portfolio expanded to look after those folks. And then when the fire chief left about a year ago now, I ended up successful in replacing him. So that landed me here, and just kind of my work with our folks. As you climb and become more of a leader, you're less task focused and leading more. And I really got to see how working alongside and being compassionate and caring and showing the folks that they are super valued and how that impacts their performance. And it's been an amazing journey, and hopefully we get to continue to improve every day.
I love that you said you started off on wanting to ride fire trucks and kick indoors. And so I'd be curious, I imagine, the excitement of that compared to the excitement of your day-to-day might be different, but if you could open up the hood a little bit, like what's the thing that gives you the most excitement right now that, you used to get the ride in the truck and the kicking in the doors? Is there anything, I don't know if it could compare, but is there anything for you that this gets me charged in my role? Because I imagine it's a fair bit different.
For me, I mean, obviously the actual physical component back in the day of being able to do that, to roll up and see the flames rolling out a window, right? And just get, put your shoulder into that door and away you go, was an absolute rush. Now, there's no question for me. I know the biggest thing for me that is the most rewarding and is exciting is when I get to see our officers, especially the young officers, as they're going through the ranks and promotional process, when they roll on scene, and to see them excel. We have, with technology, the availability to flip our phone into a portable radio. And so I get to hear from the onset of the call, and I text them quite a bit, like, way to go, you knocked it out of the park, or what a great job on the communications piece and great work. And that to me is the rewarding piece now. That's the adrenaline rush when I get to hear a young officer arrive on scene and he just crushes the call with great communications, great command presence on the fire ground, and then they perform a great knockdown or a good rescue, right? That to me now is the adrenaline rush.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Well, I know today the main topic of our conversation is excelling through compassion, and we've spoken a lot about this as we were preparing for our session today. And I thought you brought forward something good, like, how would you even define compassion? Because we all might have a slight different definition of it, and I'd just be curious, what's yours?
Yeah, it's a great place to start as a frame of reference. Our mayor coined the compassionate city, and so it's like, so what does that really mean, right? Like, being a compassionate city, what's that all about? And it was just interesting. He came in around the same time I came in as the platoon chief, and working with our staff. And to me, like, compassion is an action word, right? you can talk about it, but it's the doing part, it's the actual action piece. And it's about caring for people, authentically caring, not just doing it because you think, well, this is a means to an end. You have to really genuinely care about your people. They pick up on that right away. If it's not authentic, it takes seconds for them to read the body language and this is just lip service. He's just saying it to us, just to pretend that he cares. And I think that caring has to be authentic. I heard a great quote one day that people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. And your staff, you can be incredibly talented, academic, competent, but if you don't care about your team and about your folks, they're not going to care how much you know.
That's a really great kind of bridge into the next question I have. Then is with care being at the center for you of compassion, which I think is a great way to think about it. What would that actually look like? Like, what types of behaviors, do you do for yourself, or even that you've done for supporting others, like in your experience over the years? Again, for me, I imagine it might be different, demonstrating care as the person on the front ground doing the fires versus now you're the fire chief of the whole show. So what do those kind of care behaviors look like from your experience?
I like what you said earlier on about self-care, right? And I talk about that with our leaders here in the fire service. First and foremost, we have to care for ourselves. If we don't have ourselves in a good place, physically and mentally, we can't care for others. Whether as a leader you're caring for your company of four, or you're on the fire ground going to a medical call where you're caring for folks in our community. So if you're not caring for yourself, then that's the first problem. And I mean, we can build that out too. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. As a leader, if you're coming to work in whatever industry you're in, and if you're not in a good place, how can you look after other people? And I tell our staff, think about, if you look after yourself, that's number one. But that enables you now to look after, you can be a better father, you can be a better husband, and then you can be a better team member as a firefighter, and you can serve our community better. So it really starts with self-care. And then caring, for me, I always talk about active listening, so that the leaders just listen to your staff, listen to your folks. And I'm sure we're all guilty of this. I'm still guilty of this even today. You have conversations with your wife or your spouse, and she's talking to you, but your mindset is still, stuck at work, let's say. And she's talking to you, and the words are just bouncing off you, right? So that active listening piece is really important, to stop and listen and really let it absorb, and then to really understand, to comprehend and connect with that person. That active listening is I think one of the most critical pieces. Another thing that I do, and our fire leadership team, it was a great example the other day. We want to make sure our staff are okay. And that can range from when we show up to work first thing in the morning, and we're just checking in with everybody, how's your night? How are things going? We know from doing this, the mental fitness index with Howitt, that our top 3 stressors in the workplace for our team, we have a young group of firefighters, is our top 3 are family, their spouse and marriage is number 2, and then work is number 3. And typically it would be more work related and finance related, but we have so many young families that our folks are stressed with their families. They've got young kids, and we all know they're sick, and they've got activities and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So knowing your team, the question isn't, how was your night? It might be, how are your son or your daughter, or how are the kids at home? Oh, everybody's good, right? And talk about those questions versus, defaulting to, how was the Leafs game last night, and what's going on.
Yeah, I love how you from a demonstrating care, like trying to be specific with the questions you're asking, I think is a really good point, where we often just default to the, how's it going? And how are you supposed to respond to that type of question, as opposed to, curating the question for who it is you're talking to, because that really does matter.
Yeah. And then people, you're connecting now, right? I know they say communication, but now you're connecting, because like you said, you're now going past scratching the surface, and you're talking intimately with them about things that are happening at home.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I always like to try to push is the and what else? Talking about, okay, how are the kids? How's things at home? Working on some project or doing a renovation and how that's going, or some sport or something. And then what else is going on? And then just sitting there and being quiet for a minute
Yeah.
and let them
Yeah.
come back to you, right?
Yeah,
And what else?
I love that you brought that forward, and not to put you on the spot, but I thought, you painted a nice example, like as a leader, and particularly a fire coming up in the fire space, where doing, I would imagine, is a way of demonstrating care, like solving the problems, getting into action, jumping to that
Yeah.
thing. And you shared with me that it sometimes comes with, actually, you don't need to do anything. And you paint a scenario of even where you spent some time with a team member, and I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing that widely, but I think that's a hard tension to pull between, like, battling your need to do something and it, as opposed to just sitting and being there. And do you mind speaking to that scenario, and even the importance of how that can be the way to show care and support at times?
Yeah, absolutely. What Jesse's referring to, we were having a conversation earlier. We're just, talking about so many different ways that we care for one another. And I said, sometimes caring is just being there, just being present, and you don't have to really do anything. We had a situation at work where we had a bit of a really weird accident where a firefighter caught a piece of glass in their thumb through their glove. They were wearing their protective equipment, just like they're prescribed, and as we do on the fire ground. And this piece of glass come through the seam of the glove where it was stitched. So it was a really freak accident. And I didn't have any, huge important meetings, but I did, your day's always full. And I just basically booked out for that 2-3 hours. We went to the emerge, and I was the deputy at the time. And so I picked him up in my car and took him to the hospital. And we were about a 2.5 hour wait, and we just sat and chatted. I didn't, we were just talking about everything. He was doing a renovation. We caught up about his kids, and we just sat and chatted, and we waited for he got triaged and then go see the doc, and they put in about 4 or 5 stitches in and drove him home. And I remember he texted me a couple of days later, and just how much he appreciated the fact that I checked out for those couple of hours and just sat with him, and just took time to be with him. And he was the most important thing in my day at that time, that nothing else trumped that. And
Yeah.
I think showing the fact that I cared, to him, it obviously it meant a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like, on the other side, because the caring side, I think, is so important, but I find that can often then create tensions between, well, how do I drive performance? And for me, I would believe that the firefighting group in general is so driven on performance and executing in a safe, effective way. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you balance those tensions between holding accountability, but also, being supportive and caring? Like, because I think sometimes we can feel they're opposing one another, as opposed to maybe supporting one another in a way.
Yeah, I love this, because we just did this on last week on Friday with one of our teams. We talked about expectations and grace, and those tensions between the two, right? Having high expectations, but also having high levels of grace, right? And then, like we're talking about, that relationship piece about caring, right? So how do you have that healthy tension between task and relationship, right? And then out of that comes the excellence piece. And I think you have to, and again, it's that good connection piece. I think you have to be very clear in your expectations and what you expect from them, and then have that grace component. And caring is all kind of part of that, where if they know that you really care about them, both personally and professionally, right? There's a lot of times too, we work really hard in our promotional exams with staff. We spend a lot of time training, and you care about their professional development and growth. And then, of course, there's the personal piece too. So when they start to see how invested you are in them, and they see how much you value them, both caring wise, and then through the tasks that we do, excellence drives out of that. And we're really starting to see that in especially the last 4 or 5 years, we're getting to see where that's really come together for us.
Yeah, and I think you again painted some really interesting scenarios of times where you might have had to give difficult feedback where people weren't living up to the performance, but there's ways in which you can communicate that. And I was just so taken back by how you go about doing that in terms of saying, hey, I still, you're valuable to us. And what we're trying to do is figure out the place where you can be most productive or fit the best. And again, I think that it's still an accountability conversation, but it's done in a way that shows that care and that support for your people. And do you have any coaching that you could provide or experiences you could provide in that lens where, you've had to have those really difficult conversations where the performance was just not there, but you came from a place of demonstrating that care and value of the other person?
Yeah, there's several different things that have played out, especially as a platoon chief. I've seen this a lot. Some of our fire stations, of course, are in the downtown core, and they're running steady and they're busy all the time. And then there's some of the we have some rural areas as well where it's not nearly as busy, and not even so much that they were underperforming because they chose not to. It wasn't like a willingness, but they were, in my mind, just underperforming because they weren't in a place to perform. And I remember as a platoon chief, going out to some of the, I'm going to say, I can think of a very specific detail. At this time, there was an officer who was a childhood friend of mine. I knew how talented he was. I knew how hard he could work. And prior to me becoming a platoon chief, he was sent out to a rural area and was kind of coasting, right? I knew his retirement was like 10 years away, and he's just kind of cruising along and everything's good and it's just quiet, right? And I'm like, there's no way I'm letting this guy come through here, because I knew he had such great skills. And so I went out to see him and I just said, listen, I'm going to do things you're probably going to push you outside your comfort zone and get you into that area where I need you and to grow again, because you've come to a place where it's very quiet and comfortable and you're not doing a lot. And I know how talented you are. And once he was kind of shocked that I called him out on it, because he's like, wow, you really believe in me? I said, well, I don't, yeah, I said, I said, you were there when I was a firefighter, you were my officer, and I seen how talented you were, right? And so now you're just kind of cruising along, and I'm not buying it that I've seen you do it. So you need to just get her going and do it again. And he was really happy that I actually pushed him and called him out on it. And I brought him to a busier part of town, and he became a really critical piece for me in the fire ground, because anytime things were going wonky, I would call him on the radio and say, hey, come over to the command post. I got to see you for a minute. And then he'd come over and I'd say, listen, I need you to check on something for me. And so I think when you talk to people and you just tell them that they're valuable and they have good skills, that you can say to them, we need more. Like, I need more from you. I know you can do it. And there's times too, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave. Finish your thought.
Yeah. And then I know you and I talk too, like, sometimes there's people there, everyone has a different personality. And so you have to really know your people. I knew in this case, I could call him out pretty hard, right? And he would be receptive to it. But there's other people too, where you have to be a little maybe softer in your approach and say, hey, listen, you've got great skills, or you're underperforming, and we're seeing things that we know that are areas of growth for you, and maybe be a little bit softer in your approach.
Yeah. And I love how in the scenario you painted too, like there was a very much you focused on the other person in the scenario. It wasn't about you. So you could tell, at least in what I'm feeling in the scenario you painted, that you were showing up for them. It wasn't, showing up for your own self, even though you had some motives, I'm sure, as a leader to try to help the bigger picture, but it was really about them and helping to support them, which to me is such a critical element. We've talked a lot about the compassion, and I would assume doing all these things comes with spending time. I mean, you even painted a picture where you spent a few hours with someone that you could say, hey, that was useless time. I imagine you have 900 things you could have been doing in that day. And, for me, I'm just curious, like, how do you know that spending this time to either be there? I know you've painted scenarios before of just showing up when you got the new trainees coming in and just spending time with them and leaving the phone in your pocket and not, just being present with that group. Like, sounds like it's something you regularly try to do, is invest in your people. But how do you know that taking that time to be compassionate or spend with them is worthwhile, and either to yourself or to them or to the organization as a whole.
It's so hard because everybody nowadays wants these metrics, right? They want to be able to have things that they can measure. So if I do A, it's going to result in an increase in B, C, or D, right?
Sure.
And this is one of those things where I can't stick a hard number to it to say, oh, well, if I'm kind for 1 hour, it's going to result in 84 widgets more than what we did last time, right? But where I see it is that a couple things. We've had in our industry, of course, with critical incident stress, we have had some folks who have unfortunately suffered mental injury, right? And it's easy when you break an arm, you splint it, you put a cast on it, and you let it heal away you go. You have mental injury, and of course, you don't see that. And I know we had 3 members of our team who were off short term, and they returned to work, and they were pretty candid about it. That's one thing that's nice about firefighting is the men and women, they're pretty forward with their thinking. They don't hold back and sugarcoat it. And I know that I know the third one as well, just indirectly, but 2 of them came out and specifically just said, if it wasn't for the support and the fact that you value us and that you care about us, we would not be here, because we know we can come to work. We know that you care about us. We know that if something happens, we can, reach out to our leadership team, so our deputies as well, and that they're going to be cared for and that they're valued and important to us. So even just having them show up to work, right? Now you're going from someone who is absent out of the workplace and now is in the workplace. So I can't put a productivity number on it, but I can tell you it's, hundreds of thousands of dollars when you have a firefighter come back to work. So that's big there. And then, in excellence, when we start talking about excellence, we see it where when you care about somebody and you show that you care about them by the actions that you do, and then we have that expectation is that anytime you go out in the community, that is somebody's grandmother, that's somebody's grandfather, that's somebody's son or daughter. So now that care kind of it's contagious, right? And it spills. And where I get the feedback on that is our community it's medium sized. It's not huge like a Toronto, and it's not a small little town, but it's a medium sized city, but we know a lot of people. And so we hear that, hey, this officer was at a call and we lost my mom, and it was really stressful for the family, but this crew came in and this was the captain, and they were so kind to us and they were so caring. And it was a terrible day for us, but they helped us get through it, through that little small piece of that day. And they're very appreciative of it.
I know with other groups and even yourself, there's even a conversation around just the feel in the space. And sometimes you just know it. And what would the feel be like in the fire hall and do you think then, based on your experience, that it's the same across organizations, or is it maybe dependent upon the type of work you do and even the people within that work? But maybe first, what feel do you notice that says, yeah, I think this is worth it? Like I just can kind of feel it in my gut and my intuition.
Yeah, it's that tension in the air that you can feel. So when things aren't going well, and I'll use, we can talk about the pandemic a little bit, right? All of a sudden, you see all of the things on the news that are coming down very early on when it all kicked in March, right? And there's so much uncertainty, and then the government's coming down with restrictions. And for us, I think firefighters have this interaction disease where we just feel so compelled to interact with the community and with one another. And when you shut that down, right, everyone was just kind of blown away by that whole thing. And so you could see the quietness in the fire hall. You could see in the different firehouses, the tension of like what's next and the uncertainty and how quiet it was. And then, once things started to get better and, we're about 18 months and things are loosening up, and now you hear the noise level inside the firehouse, right? You can hear the laughter, you can hear the more relaxed, you can hear some joking around. And I find that the louder the fire hall is, between, everybody talking in the kitchen, of course everyone's talking at once, and as things get louder, things are better, right? And when things are quiet, there's something going on, right?
Yeah.
And
And I
that's how we
find
see
like
it.
when we were chatting about that real importance of, knowing what the feel is in your group of like thriving culture versus that hesitant or tension, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
Because I do feel in our experience, even there could be a lot of difference depending on the sector or the type of people that tend to be within that sector. It can change. And just one more question we have for you, then we'll get you out of here. At the very early on, you talked about, the self-care and the importance of it. I'm just curious, like I would expect, within your industry in particular, there's kind of a persona of possibly being the person to handle all the stuff. You got to be forever resilient. And I think it was even your words that said, often the people's worst days are you're supposed to be on your best days to effectively support them. And I see the possibility of there being this maybe even stigma attached to like, hey, you got to be going all the time, and we got to be taking care of ourselves, and we got to be going. And but I would imagine that you're human beings just like others. And how do you find your group, or even how you've role modeled showing compassion in that you're not perfect every day, and bridging that conversation? Because I can imagine it might be a harder one than maybe some other sectors where there is kind of a pedestal that we can create for firefighters, and they're supposed to be the saviors and the heroes of things, and understandably so. But again, that can come with some drawbacks of maybe saying, hey, I got to put my hand up here because I've had enough, and I need some help. How do you navigate that, or what kind of things have you done in the past, either for yourself or supporting those around you?
Yeah. Well, we're certainly not perfect, and it's definitely, we're on this journey, and it's a marathon, and I don't think there actually is a destination at the end there. So it's not a sprint. It's not short. But like you said, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they're calling us on their worst day, and their expectation, because of the place that they're in when they call, is that when we show up, we're at our best. And like you said, it's not always easy to be on top of your game there. And I think it starts with a couple things. I think all of us showing that we are vulnerable. I mean, you, me, we all have good days, we all have bad days. And I think it's really important to share that. When people say, hey, how's it going, Chief? I just say, oh, I'm good. But meanwhile, I'm not good, right? Like maybe I got somebody sick at home and I've been up all night with a sick kid, and so I'm pretty tired. Maybe there's, I could have had, with work, we still have some critical incident stress stuff, and I'm, think I'm like most fire chiefs. When your team is hurting, you hurt, right? So when you see members of your team go to a call and they're suffering, where they're hurting from that call, and they are, that hurts you, right? Because you want to see them do well all the time. And I think being vulnerable, and I know Brenny Brown does a lot of work on this too, showing that we are vulnerable, I think that drops all the defense mechanisms, or at least helps bring them down. And then once we show that we are vulnerable, and yeah, we have great days. We have days where you roll in and you're energized and you're recharged. And then there's days where, you're hurting, and you share that, then that helps them go, oh, hey, if our leaders are like that, then we must be able to be like that too. And then you can start having those conversations to, say, how are things? I know that was I'll use for our industry, that was a terrible call. Like you guys went on, and girls went on this call, and when you folks got there, like that was terrible. It must have sucked. Like it was bad, right? Somebody, was traumatic, injured, or worse, fatal, and how horrible it was. And they're like, yeah, it was terrible. And then you can start to open up. And then one of the questions, and I learned this from another panel from the CEO from WestJet, said, what does help look like for you? Because we typically always think what works for me is going to work for you, right? And so if we can open up and have that vulnerability, and then have people open up, drop those defenses, and we start talking, and then say, okay, like, is this a point in time where we need to reach out and look for some help? Or maybe you don't need it now, but maybe in 2 or 3 weeks, something triggers you where you're going to need some help. And then, obviously we have different resources, through our benefits program, but what does the help look like for you? That's to me is the next biggest question.
Yeah, I love that question because again, it comes back to centering on the person that you're trying to support,
Yeah.
and it not being about, you, the leader in that case. But I'm sure we could keep our conversation going on for another 20 minutes. And I really, really appreciate you taking some time to share with us, and even, to your point, be vulnerable with the audience. So really value and grateful for that. And thanks so much again for your insight. And I know I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me, I took a lot out of the conversation today. So again, thank you so much, and hopefully you have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
See you again. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.